Hi everyone, I'm Eric Vanderwall, and today we're giving a little talk here for the Nervous Network blockchain. And if you're not already familiar, we are in the second week of our hackathon. And if you'd like to join, it's definitely not too late. So this hackathon is focused on DeFi on our EVM compatible layer 2. So that means if you know Solidity, if you're used to writing dApps on Ethereum, come check it out, join, launch your dApp, win some cool prizes, and the information for that will be below here in the video. Okay, now to get started. If you build it, they won't come. So this is community building in the Web 3.0 era. And so I'm going to do a little bit of a more traditional style talk than sort of a YouTube-y type talk. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to hook you first, and hopefully you know why you're here. So I'll just introduce myself quickly. I'm Eric Vanderwall. I'm the head of developer relations at Nervous Network. And I've worked on community building for some different projects in the past, some video game stuff, some video game tool stuff, worked in e-learning and a bunch of other places. Okay, as you can hear, sometimes some trains go by. I'll try and minimize that as much as I can, but you might hear a little bit in the background. So when we talk about Web3 technology, we often talk about the technology itself rather than sort of the underlying concept. So we talk about blockchain, which is one of the bigger ones. We talk about AI, maybe like decentralized hosting like IPFS, decentralized domain names, AR, VR, or maybe they're combining them together and calling it XR and stuff like this. But really what I want to talk about more is Web 3.0, sort of an underlying philosophy or foundation of a bigger movement rather than sort of the smaller parts of the technology themselves. Because I really think it's the way that we use the technology that makes it Web3 rather than what the technology itself is. So these first three on my list here are ones that I've heard a lot about, which is open and trustlessness. So we're talking about removal of barriers or gatekeeping, which I think is a big part of the Web3 movement, especially using blockchain and things like this really help here. The next is decentralization. So things that are not being controlled by any single group or a single entity or a group of entities. So we want to decentralize things as much as possible. 3 is permissionlessness. So no third-party authority or authorization. We don't necessarily know who we're interacting with, but that doesn't matter because we can use a system that's permissionless so that we don't need to know, and yet we can still do it in a safe way. So instead of, again, relying on a third party, like for example, like maybe eBay or PayPal or whatever that may be. But what it really boils down to for me is number 4, which is control, or controlling our own information, right? This is about controlling our own money, our own information, or our own data, knowledge, whatever it is Web3 is a way for us to own that information and decide who has access to it and when. So this is a quote from Jack Welch, and you may not know who he is. I'll explain who he is after, but control your own destiny or someone else will. So actually Web 2 saw a very strong centralization of information and power and everything else. And we've seen this sort of speed up with COVID. COVID has actually centralized power more, it's centralized money. The rich have got richer, the poor have got poorer, and the middle class has really shrunk. And we can see this through like the rise of Azure and AWS and Google's cloud offering and stuff like that. As more and more websites are actually moving to this and more information is moving there, we're seeing more and more banks go online and control payment services. And basically everything Web 2.0 has been about the centralization of power, in fact. So this guy, Jack Welch, you may not know him. He actually died a few years ago, and he was sort of a famous American business executive. And he was also the chairman of GE, or he was the CEO and chairman of GE, General Electric, for like 20 years. And when he retired, he had the biggest severance payment ever of any sort of CEO. And it was about $400 million, which I think brought him up to about $720 million altogether. So, I mean, he wasn't, in my mind, necessarily a likable guy, a nice guy, anything like that. He was sort of talked that global warming was sort of a scam and that it was just an attack on capitalism so that socialists could bring capitalism down, and that it was just something that was being made up, that it was bullshit. And, so I mean, I honestly don't respect him sort of as a person, but as a business person, he wasn't wrong, and he represented sort of these rich, top tier elite people. And he said, control your own destiny or someone else will. And I believe this is really true, right? Like, we are passing the control of our own destiny through technology to other people more and more so. And Web3 gives us a way to, take back a certain amount of that control and decentralize what we're doing in our information and our money and everything else. So I think this is sort of one of the underlying parts of Web3. And, this theme isn't new, right? We've seen this theme for a long time. Even more modernly, we go back to around, what was it? Around year 2000. Well, after 2000 was when The Matrix came out. And the Matrix was the entire movie was about systems of control and in order to keep us in line, right? Like that. And they're using technology to do that, to essentially sap the human existence in order for someone to maintain a system of control. And, that was more than 20 years ago, and it still, is relatively true, even more so every day as we go along. Okay, so let's talk about the title of my talk, because you may not have gotten the reference depending on where you're from or how old you are. So the reference is from this movie called Field of Dreams. And in the movie, the line is actually, if you build it, he will come. But people always say, if you build it, they will come, right? So it's another one of those movie quotes that sort of gets a little bit twisted. But the essence is the same. And in this movie, Field of Dreams, we've got Kevin Costner, who you may know as a famous movie star. And he's a farmer, and on his cornfield, which I guess is his cash crop, is where he makes his money, he decides to mow it down and build a baseball field to attract, famous ghosts to play baseball. And he, continuously heard this voice or had this dream or this premonition that if you build it, they will come, that, the players will come, these ghost players, and people will come from all around to watch, and there will be this sort of revival movement around it. And it sort of became a common phrase in marketing and other things, like, if you build it, they will come. But it really is a fallacy in marketing. It's really not true. And it revolved around sort of this idea that if you have good ideas and you have positive intentions, you have this fiery passion that fans will come, customers will come, and it will be a success. But I mean, is that really true? Here's the reality. The reality is we're in a world right now where anyone can be a content creator, and that's something that Web 2 has brought us, and it's been great. You can have your own videos online, whether it's on YouTube or something. You can publish your own books on Amazon. You can make your own games on Steam. But there's a huge piece missing here, and that's discoverability. I mean, we're not even talking about marketing or selling to someone. We just want even people to know that our stuff exists. If people even know our stuff exists, that's already a win for a lot of people. So just because we build it doesn't mean that people will come. So, marketing is important, but, where or when do we start doing that? And MailChimp, you, again, may or may not know, is a pretty big newsletter, mail-out type company that a lot of people use. They've got a lot of money. And they did some research back in 2019, and they hired a third-party company to do independent sample research. And they only did about 505 small companies in the US, but it was enough. And they're basically looking for new businesses or ones that had started within the last 2 years. And they came up with these key takeaways based on what they found. And these are the three takeaways, and you can read those. But when it came to marketing, where or when do I start marketing? So here's a little hint. Here is the name of the report that they put out. The name of the report is why small businesses should start marketing on day one, a MailChimp report. So this is the takeaway here really for us, is that start marketing on day one, the very beginning, way early. Okay, and then, if you're not in marketing or you're not in a lot of content creation, you're going to say to yourself, okay, I'm going to market something when I don't have anything yet. I'm going to market before there's even a product done already. Like, who does that? Okay. Who does that? These guys, basically everyone. So here's a picture of like video games, but all of these video games started marketing long, long before their games were done. I mean, many of them just started with, they're going to release a new title. They maybe have a name. It's not even the real name often. And then they have marketing images drawn up and maybe some concept art that comes out like a year or 2 years, 3 years before anything actually materializes. And heck, some of these games never end up materializing. But it's not unique, right? Every major media company, whether it's like, books or movies or video games or whatever else, tons of products and everything else, they start marketing right when they have the basic concept sort of drawn out and saying, okay, we think we're going to commit to this. And this is something for us to learn from, is that we should not start until we have an actual product. You don't even need to wait until you have an MVP. Okay, once you've sort of committed yourself to doing it, and an MVP can help that, you need to start moving forward on this right away. And then you might be saying, Eric, I thought we're talking about community, not marketing, right? So I want to give you a quote here from Greg Eisenberg. So Greg Eisenberg, he's the growth advisor at TikTok. He's the head of product strategy at WeWork. He's an advisor to Reddit. So he's got a lot of credits to his name around community and marketing and everything in that sphere. And he says, community is the new marketing. You don't build a community to promote your product. You build a community so you don't have to promote your product. I think I read that out right. Read it just in case. But when we have a community, then people know about our products, right? We don't build a community to try and promote it. So we're going to get into that like a little bit more so we can have sort of a deeper understanding around how that works, really. But why community over marketing? Like, why have a go-to community plan rather than a go-to marketing plan? And there's lots of reasons, and I'm going to go over like some of them. But one of the biggest ones of software engineering, especially, which is where my field has been, working in developer relations, but I spent a lot of time working in community management overall, is that people don't like being told what to do. And even more so today than 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago, it's all about control, right? So, don't tell me what to do. We're not really in the era anymore of like making products and then marketing to people to tell them how amazing and awesome it is and that they really need it in their life. We've really moved into the era of that, products, we're trying to make products that customers actually want, they like, and they need. And a community allows us a two-way mechanism of, communicating back and forth very early on to help find the right market fit and something that people want and they like and they can use. And that really allows you to find that fit much earlier on than, making a whole product and then trying to market it and say, okay, well, this isn't going to work, so we're going to get rid of this and make a new product. So people really want to be part of a conversation rather than just being told. So it's a two-way street rather than a one-way street here. So especially when people hear the word marketing, if there's like a knee-jerk reaction, especially within the technology community. And we can see this, like you may be familiar with stuff like Product Hunt, which was sort of developed around the idea of that we need community and feedback around our products, in very early stages, especially technology stuff. And it really fills that niche well. So what is community? This is a big question. Like, community could be your country, it could be your state, it could be your city, it could be your school, it could be your neighborhood. I mean, it doesn't have to be a geographic, right? It could be your sports team, or it could be one sports star that you build a community around. So I don't want to get into like a very academic discussion of what community is. I think most people have sort of a basic sense of, what is community. But there are these four categories, I guess we can call them, that are a sense of community theory that was created in 1986 by David McMillan and David Chavez. And they wrote on this paper, and it has a quote that I think sort of summarizes things well. It says, a feeling that members have of belonging, a feeling that members matter to one another and to the group, and a shared faith that members' needs will be met through their commitment together. So this is their description of community. And it could be potentially broken down into these four aspects. So membership, influence, fulfillment, and shared connection. So membership is something we're probably the most familiar with, especially these days. You know, we have a lot of online communities and things like that. But it really revolves around the idea of boundaries, emotional safety, some sense of like belonging to that group. And also, of course, like common language and rituals. So we'll talk about that a little bit after. So number two would be influence. And influence is sort of like influence not only with outside of the group, but inside the group. And it's like a give and take influence on each other. It's not that, you know, I tell you what to do and you listen to me and therefore I feel part of the community. It's that we have a sense of influence on each other. And if we don't feel, for example, that anyone's listening to us within a community, then, you know, we're just going to leave. We might as well be talking to ourselves. So even if it's only the community moderators, people need to feel like they're being heard. So number three is fulfillment. So this is talking about fulfillment of needs. Did they get what they wanted by joining the community? Did they get the problem solved? So often with technical communities, they come first for technical support more than anything. And then when they get that support, they find out there's sort of more to the community. And once they become part of that community or, you know, get their little peek in, then they might end up staying. And I'm going to talk about that later too, but we're going to talk about identity within a community. And the last one here is a shared connection. So this is, you know, bonding or shared hardships. You know, we've created our war stories together. You know, maybe we've invested in crypto, the same crypto as each other, and it's like tanked, and it tanked together, and we're both commiserating by how horrible it is, but then it, you know, the dip bounces back up, and people are super excited about it, and this actually creates, you know, a sense of shared connection and bonding through these extreme situations. So community is membership, influence, fulfillment, and shared connection. So as I said, communities have their own subcultures, their own language, their own ritual, and these sort of things. And, you know, it's important. This is an important part of how they or how we, you know, communicate with each other. And I like this meme here. It says, what if in the future we only communicated through memes? Well, we've really started to come towards that in a lot of places, especially within the crypto community. Obviously has a very strong, I wouldn't say desire, but they, you know, we communicate through memes. We use memes that make sense. And there's a sense of shared history there through it, and a sense of loss, a sense of winning, you know, and a sense of friendship as we see things that, hey, you know, I went through that, I had that same problem, or, you know, I also think that's funny. So it's a very integral part of the crypto community overall. So this is a quote, and I believe this is from Orbit. I'll explain Orbit in a minute, but software is no longer sold, it's adopted. So this is a common phrase in developer relations. And this isn't only about software, but sort of products all over, is we build a sense of identity around them. Like, we don't just consume products anymore, we identify with them, we bring them into our lives, you know. And a lot of companies spend a lot of money to stay up to date with consumer research. And as a smaller, newer company, you know, we often just don't have the money for this. Consumer research is really expensive. But what we can do is really stay closer to the metal, like closer to the actual source, the community, and be part of it to get this sort of consumer research much easier. So this is sort of a superpower of like smaller businesses or smaller communities that, we're able to like really deep dive and be a part of it. That being said, some like really big communities really big businesses have invested quite a bit in community over the last decade or two. And some of them you might know are like Figma, or like Lululemon, Salesforce, Sephora, Twilio, and these kind of communities. Like think about Lululemon. It's not just a product, it becomes sort of people's identity. They identify as being a Lululemon person, right? And they wear, Lulu branded clothes or whatever else. It doesn't have to be branded, but they do because they identify with that community of people. So it moves just beyond branding to identification, which is a big part of community. Okay, wait, tell me why again, community versus marketing. So I'm just going to give you a few benefits of community over sort of direct marketing before we get any farther. So community typically has a much lower cost, right? For traditional marketing, we have to pay for ads, we pay for clicks and this sort of stuff. So this is more of a time versus money trade-off. And when your business is new or whatever product you're launching or service or software is new, you typically have more time to connect to people directly at the beginning. And that's the right time to do it. So if you have a very strong core community at the beginning and then work off it with paid ads later as you have the financial means to do it, that's a really good way to do it. It can be really difficult to find the money to do paid marketing at the beginning and then try and build community around it after you start have people engaging with you. So it's much easier to do it the other way around. Okay, the other thing is community gives you much quicker feedback time and faster iteration of products. So if you're working in the Web3 space, you already know there's like normal business time, right? And it goes sort of slow. And then you have startup time, which goes pretty fast. And then you have like Web3 or, crypto time, and it's like goes really fast. So I had a career before this, and I spent more than 5 years, for example, in one position. I was barely considered a junior. And if you have 5 years in blockchain development, you're almost an OG, right? Like that's senior level experience in crypto. So there's definitely a difference here on how much faster we need to iterate through our products and services in Web3 compared to more traditional companies. So taking a very traditional route in marketing is often time and money lost before you get the feedback that you really need. So you will also find that you have a lot higher retention of customers through community versus through traditional marketing. Traditional marketing is typically one way. They don't know you. They don't really know anything about you except for sort of what you project out. Versus with community, there's that two-way interaction, which allows you to sort of adjust things to your customers' needs, and therefore you're able to retain them longer. And typically Web3 type products are things that are long-term services rather than one-time sales. So the other reason for community is direct access to your customer base, right? And again, this goes to the whole idea of Web3 is that we don't want to be using any third parties. If I'm using traditional advertising, unless I'm going out to the road and hanging and holding out my own sandwich cardboard sign saying, join my community or buy my product, right? That's the only direct way I'm going to be able to access customers. But with community, you have direct access to your customers directly. We don't have to pay a newspaper to do it, or a magazine or Facebook ads or Google ads that, they could potentially shut us down or censor what we're saying or whatever else. Community is direct access to your customer base. And lastly, and potentially one of the biggest parts, is that you can tap into that energy of your community, the knowledge, the contributions, and they can help you solve problems and push things forward. Lots of people who are part of your community are very knowledgeable about it, and it is something that we should, take advantage of, and we can help each other. Familiar with this even. So this is a marketing bedrock, fundamental type concept here is the 5-stage sales funnel. And just even hearing the idea of sales funnels makes me want to throw up a little bit in my mouth. Like, I don't want to be sold to. I don't want to be marketed to. I don't want to be knowing that I'm going through a sales funnel, right? And it's very linear. It's like you start here and you go here and you go here and you go here and you go here. And, over time, of course, different marketing people have made up like different ideas like, oh, you can jump back to this part in the funnel or you move over to this other funnel, but they're really stretching the metaphor beyond what it is, because it really is a funnel. Like, they expect you to go through these steps like awareness, interest, evaluation, engagement, and purchase. And this is really not how people work today, okay? And this really fits more like traditional marketing than where we're at. And it feels like to me, like, I don't know how it is where you're from, but I've been to restaurants before where like I'll go to a restaurant and I'll sit down, it's a nice restaurant, order food, and then I feel like I'm halfway done eating and the waiter or the waitress is like looking at me just like waiting for me to go because I've completed, like the sales funnel essentially, and they have more people they want to sit down at the table and they need to push more meals through and they just want you to finish your meal and go, right? And we don't want it to be like this. We don't want like a finite goal that we're moving people towards. Like we want them to go from here to here. Where's our goal, right? We want them to be comfortable. We want them to be in proximity. We want them to be, within the community, not like moving from in to out. And so based around this concept is what is called the orbit model. And this was came up with by Orbit. They're a company, and they have software, for example, to try and track this so-called orbit model. But this has been used in a bunch of different other companies over time. So it's not necessarily just them, but it's more of a community-based model. And the idea is that at the very center, you have this very high gravity community. So this is where essentially your leaders are, your CEOs, your founders, the people who work in the company. And with a good sense of gravity, we slowly start to pull people inwards, So on the very outer ring, we maybe have people who are just observing, maybe through social media or they've read an article or something. And then on the third ring, we've got like users, like people who actually have started to engage with our technology or sign up for our newsletters or whatever it may be. And then you've got people who are your fans. Maybe those are the people who come to your community often, they chat with each other, they engage with you. And then level one, we've got the ambassadors. So the ambassadors are, for example, what we might call trailblazers at Nervos Network, but it can also be, other kinds of people. And then we've got this central idea. And with a good high gravity community, we've got lots of people on many different stages. And of course, the farther the stage out it is, the more amount of people there are. Like typically there's a lot more observers than there are, actual fans. And normally people move sort of through the steps towards the center, but they also sort of bounce back in and out. It's not necessarily that you've moved to a stage and you're going to stay at that stage forever because that's who you are. But in fact, it's this sort of more of like a holistic way of looking at it, because things in life are not linear. They're not like start at A, go to B, finish, right? Things in life are circular. This is sort of the natural order of the universe. The seasons, the days, the months, birth, growth, death, it's just the cycle over and over again. And this type of model fits, I think, more realistically with what people actually do and how people want to be treated as individuals rather than as a sales funnel. So let's talk about a key part of building your community, so you can sort of get a taste for your community building. And the number one rule of community building in my mind is be authentic. And you may or may not know this picture. This is a picture of furries. So furries is people who like to dress up as animals. There can be a sexual element to it, or it could not be. It really depends, I guess, on the group. I'm not really know a whole lot about furries, but I think it's a really good example because it's extremely niche, right? Like it's not that mainstream. And yet these people are very authentic to who they are and to their vision of the community. And it's what we would consider to be fairly extreme. And by being that, it really attracts, it's a like attracts like. Like these people attract people like themselves, right? And it's because of this authenticness that it happens. And we can see this throughout history with lots of like political leaders who are, maybe I'm not a fan of them, but they are very extreme and they attract an extreme following. And when you're in a world of very crowded marketplace, like maybe you've got like Mercedes-Benz and you've got Toyota and you've got all these other automakers, right? And they're all fighting for a piece of the pie. And you have Tesla come in here, and again, whether you're a Tesla fan or not, they have done extremely well in their marketing and their community growth because they are extremely authentic to what they are. They are very extreme, comparatively speaking. They're very different, and they really pulled in people who think like them or think like their message, right? So no matter how full a space may be, there's potentially more room for you or your community or your product or your service if it's very authentic and it's very unique or extreme in a certain niche. So don't be afraid to niche down and try and attract people like you. And it becomes like an idea that people rally around. It's hard to build a community around nothing. Of course, it's possible. We've seen it done. But it's a lot easier to build a community around something. So, shared goals, tasks, identities, these sort of things are great places to start. So this is the warning donkey. He's come to give you a warning. And the word of warning is this: you cannot make everyone happy. And while I believe Web 3.0 is about openness and inclusiveness, there also needs to be a certain amount of gatekeeping to keep your community safe for the members that it does focus on. And that doesn't mean you have to be rude or discriminatory about it, but the fact is your community is about something. It's about a niche idea or a concept or a feeling or whatever it is. And if you allow a lot of other ideas or concepts to sort of infiltrate that space, it will become watered down and not what you want it to be. So you will find that you cannot make everyone happy. And so what does that have to do with the donkey? Okay, so the donkey here is from a Chinese story. I'm not sure we consider it a proverb. I guess it's a proverb. And so there's a grandpa and his grandchild, and they're riding towards the town to go to the marketplace. And the grandpa puts the kid up onto the donkey to ride so he doesn't get so tired, and the grandpa pulls the donkey behind him. And someone walks by and they say, "Look at that little kid letting an old man walk while he rides the donkey and has all the rest." And so the grandpa said, okay, so he takes down the kid, and the grandpa gets up on the donkey, and they keep heading towards the marketplace. Sure enough, passing the other direction, some more people walk by, and they say, "Oh my God, look at that old man making a child walk everywhere. Such a hard life for children these days. I can't believe it." So the old man thinks, okay, that's right. So he gets off the donkey, and both him and the child are now walking and pulling the donkey. And once again, another group of people walk by and they said, "Look at those idiots. Both of them pulling a donkey, not one of them riding it. What a waste." And so finally the grandpa and the child decides, well, this is ridiculous. So they cut down a piece of bamboo, like a long piece of bamboo, and they tie the donkey up under it and carry it over their shoulders and walk into town carrying the donkey. And of course, no one's riding the donkey, and they look like even more of idiots. And of course, the point of the story is if you haven't picked up on it, is that you can't make everyone happy. And if you're always trying to do what other people say you should be doing, then you're going to lose out on whatever opportunities you do have. So think of the cautionary donkey and stick to your path. Of course, take people's advice and whatnot, but you can't make everyone happy. So don't try and do it. Up, I want to talk about this nice little circly 3 triforce type deal here. And this is called the social identity circle. And I'm actually not sure who made this up, but I believe it's not new. It's been around for a while. And communities are based upon this idea essentially of a shared social identity and participation. And what we're looking to do is reinforce a set of beliefs or actions for members to engage in. This is how they become part of a community. And at first, people won't identify at all with your community, right? Because they don't know you. And once they find out about it, that's the very first touch of identification. Like, does this resonate with me? Do I want this? Do I not want this? Is this good? Is this bad, right? And this is a cycle that takes 3 steps and will, continue on and on and on throughout their journey. There's no ending point necessarily. And so we'll just go over the different parts of this journey here. So we have identification, participation, and validation. So identification is people are attracted to the social identity of the groups. And this could be a very superficial attraction at first, right? It's just, passing glance, so to speak. And people participate in some way, or they take some sort of action. And then step 3, they have some type of reward for their participation, some sort of validation for it, right? And so let's give a couple of concrete examples, because otherwise it can be a little bit hard to sort of imagine what it is. So the identification first can be just an interested person. You're just interested in it. They could be a fan. They could be a super fan. They could be a committed community leader. So how do they identify themselves in comparison with that community? And they will go through different levels of this, right? And the participation itself could be something very small, like reading an article, maybe joining Discord, filling out the form to join Discord, sharing it on Twitter, right? And then we have the validation side, which is being welcomed by community members. That feels good. We feel validated. Maybe we're there for a while and people see us as knowing something. They might ask a question. We're seen as an authority on something. Or maybe somebody gives us a kudos for a funny meme. Or we make an infographic and people share it or upload it. So we go through cycles okay, so I identify as sort of a member of this community. I have to say this crypto community. This is my kind of people, And so maybe my participation is something simple. For example, I make a funny meme about it and I post it. And the validation is people upvoting it or laughing, clicking the laugh vote. And so we'll continue to go through this cycle many times before we start to identify at sort of a higher level, so to speak. And we sort of need these, well, not sort of, we do need typically these 3 steps in order to move up in that sense of identification. Now, as we move up in our sense of identification within a community, we typically move up in our level of participation. So this is from CMX, they're a community group, and they've identified 4 different categories of participation. But these are sort of arbitrary, but the fact is it basically scales from sort of low to high, right? So we have passive members. Passive members are people who are just consuming the content of the community or the business. We have active members, so those people who have registered, they're engaged, maybe they're making some small content for the community. Then we have power members, so these are people who come by the community often, they're committed to the community, they make lots of contributions. And then we have leaders, so these are people who take on moderating or launching local chapters or sort of things like this. So, ideally with our community, we want to grow people through the levels of participation and have opportunities for people to do this. And if we don't consciously make opportunities for people to move up, sometimes it can be difficult to move past some of these stages. Even from passive member to active member, we need to give people a method of becoming an active member. We need to give them a clear-cut path to doing that. That doesn't mean we have to hand it out to everyone like candy. There should still be a sign-up form. Maybe they have to follow some rules or do some other small tasks to become an active member. But it needs to be clear on how to get there, and there has to actually be a path. And the same especially from power members to leaders or things like that. But at a certain point of communities, we have to give up a little bit of control of those communities and start having community leaders. Otherwise, it's not really a community, it's just sort of a dictatorship, right? Or you're an influencer, whatever you want to call it. It's not a real community. Now, I do have one more tip here before I leave this slide. And I think this is the right place to talk about it. So we probably have all heard of the 80-20 model, like, 80% of the work is in the last 20% of the project or something like that, 80-20, right? And really this happens with our community as well. We sort of typically have an inner 20% that is like very dedicated or hardworking, or they're there every day. And then there's sort of that 80% that floats around that community. And sometimes it's going to be a little bit harder to gauge that 80% about how big they are, because they're often quite passive, right? They might be just consuming our content, or they know about us through Twitter or other social media. They may not be always there. So it's more difficult to gauge. But you're better off spending 80% of your energy working with those 20%, those inner 20%, than the other way around. Okay? This is the right people to engage, especially at the beginning, because their efforts will redouble outwards to the communities farther out. So don't spend a lot of time, especially at the beginning, trying to chase that 80, that 80 outer percent, 80% outer. Focus on the inner 20% there, and your efforts will be rewarded much better. Okay, so we're just doing a little more theory here, because I think this is sort of important to understand. And once you have a better understanding of these things, then you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Because you've done these things, you know about these things, but maybe you haven't seen the theory of how they necessarily work. So this is by a guy named Douglas Atkin. He calls it the commitment curve, and he's the head of community at Airbnb. So he knows something a little bit about community. And along the bottom here, we have your time commitment, or your time that you've spent. And then, going this way here, we have your commitment. How much have you committed? And actually, I've added these 3 extra labels here. So I've added passive active leaders, right? These are not part of the actual commitment curve. But at the beginning here, he has, and let me squint here. For example, he's got, read your purpose, read the member policies, and maybe like look at photos or videos. So this is passive. This is part of the passive group. Then we get into the active group. So maybe they become a member, read the forums, comments on blogs, contribute to the blogs, and then we start to move into sort of the power members. I didn't add it here, but it falls in the same category. Maybe they're writing blog posts, they're becoming key contributors, participating in live videos and stuff. And then we jump up to the leaders here. So this is, a lot more time and a lot more commitment to fall into this leader category. They're going to lead a forum, lead live videos, attend events, organize events, and have actual leadership roles. Now, the commitment curve doesn't need to be specifically these tasks, right? Your own community is going to have its own tasks. So I'm just going to go to the next slide here. So here's another way to break it down. This is from a different group who just decided they're going to look at it a different way. So we have discovery, onboarding, engagement, and leadership. But it works out to be pretty similar. So when you're starting your community, definitely look at a commitment curve and maybe Google and find a couple others. And think of the common tasks that you think that would occur within your community. So, reading your Twitter post, reading your blog, joining your Discord, or all these things. And then go to the other end of the spectrum and do the things that you think are more leadership. And what we can do is we're just going to write them down on like slips of paper, okay? And then you want to organize them in order. Because just like if you've worked with the agile method and you're trying to organize your time, it's difficult to estimate how long tasks will take without a relationship to other tasks. Just like it's sometimes difficult to decide how much of a commitment something is within a community until you compare it to the other possible commitments. So different communities will have different commitment scales. So it helps if you write them all down on paper, then organize them all in order, and then you can rearrange them a few times, and then come up with your own community commitment curve. more trains. Okay, so once you've got all the ones you want in order, you can start looking for sort of the gaps in there. There are going to be, for sure, gaps of things that people could do or should do or you want them to do. And you can start filling those in, and that's a good time to see sort of where those holes exist. And these steps or things they can do are not necessarily organic. They're often something that you need to create or manufacture in order to have, varying levels of commitment within the curve, because you don't want to have any one space that's sort of too big in the curve that it's a huge jump, like people going from reading blog posts to attending live events. Okay, and this actually, and I can't remember who wrote the paper now, but there was a paper about it. I think it was about meetup.com. Yeah, so meetup.com, they, I believe it was actually Douglas Atkin they had in to talk about meetup.com, and they had difficulty attracting people to host their own meetups. And it was because you basically went from seeing the website, attending a meetup, to them wanting you to host a meetup. Like, there was a huge gap here in this commitment curve that it was difficult to get people to commit to doing their own meetups. Right? And so they needed to add like a lot of extra steps in between to get people sort of comfortable to that idea of the end goal, so that they could move through those phases well. So if you have any kind of community, and for example, maybe your goal is to get someone to contribute code, you can't typically, or you will lose most people if it's like join Discord, commit code. There needs to be stuff in between. Okay, so this is a little chart here, and you can sort of read over it later if you can like get your eyes in real close, that talks about a bunch of different community tools that are out there that people use, whether it's like platforms, chat platforms, forums, voice. I'm pretty sure this was made by Commodore, so they have themselves at like the top in the middle, so it's like operating system, but that might be a little bit biased there. So, but what I want to talk about here is, this is my mental reminder to talk about the 60-30-10 rule. So we've got a lot of numbers going on here. And this is a social media posting rule, and you may or may not have heard of it, and I don't know who created this rule necessarily, but it tends to be fairly true. So 60-30-10 is, and this is what social media marketing teams often apply, is that 60% of your posts, your content, should be what we could consider engaging content in order to try and engage people or tell them about something related to your niche in general, right? 30% of your content should be shared from other sources. So you should be resharing other people's content, but not too much, definitely not more than half, right? Then the last 10% of your content is promotion or sales driven. And this can be true for your community type stuff, right? You want at least 60% of the community to be around people engaging each other, sharing, writing cool stuff, whatever it may be. Then maybe 30% people bringing out outside information, right? Your community is not going to always just be all about, you or whatever you're doing. And then you want to keep your promotional stuff 10% or even less in communities compared to social stuff. So this hopefully gives you like an idea of the balance that you could hope to have there. So I'm getting towards the end of this lecture or talk. And I wanted to talk about a couple of pitfalls and sort of myths or places that people can go wrong with building community. So these are some myths. So instant community myth, right? Like overnight success. Yeah, it happens. It happens, like people buy lottery tickets so their community blows up overnight. But it's not common, and if you go in thinking that's going to be the way it happens, you're going to be really sorely disappointed. Maybe you're going to quit early or whatever else. So size matters most. Gentlemen, size does not always matter most. Sometimes there are things that matter more. And in this case, the quality of your community matters as much as the size. So that's important to remember. So that there's some simple hack, like if you buy this course or if you read, this article, or you apply this one magic trick or whatever, your community will build out of control. Just send us $59.99. That's really not the truth. Of course, there's a lot of fundamentals to community building, but the number one thing you need to invest in your community is time and authenticity, and that will help move the needle more than anything else. So The fourth myth is that all communities will be a success. That's not true. I've seen people hold on to communities long past when they should have just decided to let go because the community didn't have a strong identity to begin with, and it was difficult to build up from there, or they didn't have strong concepts, or it wasn't built around a product or an idea or a person or whatever it is well. And sometimes it is worth it to cut your loss. So not all communities will be a success. And I think if you can know that at the beginning before you start and go into it just like a product and thinking not all products are going to be a success, then that's okay. Another myth, it won't take much of my time. Like we said, communities take time. They take lots and lots of time, more than they take money. Communities are organic. Yes, a lot of people think this, like, oh, we have a good product, a community is going to spawn up around it. That's not true. Even at the beginning of like when Reddit started, it was basically Reddit employees writing posts to themselves and to other people on Reddit, pretending to be lots of different members in order to stir up a certain amount of engagement. So most communities are not, in fact, organic, they're manufactured. So go ahead, go out there, manufacture and find a couple of friends to start your community with you that you already know, or, create 2 accounts, get your mom on there, get your little brother on there, and start your community. So members are there to be sold. Yeah. Of course not. People are just going to leave if you're just pitching them. So communities are there to help each other and to rally around certain ideas or tasks or whatever it may be. And the last one is community is just marketing by another name. So I hope not. I think the community can lead to increased sales and adoption of whatever your product or service is, especially for early companies or smaller companies, have the advantage here. But it's not just marketing. And I think we need to get out of that mindset that it's just essentially marketing to a group of people, that are well concentrated for your sales. Okay, so here's some final tips on community. So this is me here. I'm like way at the bottom with like my head pretty much up someone else's butt, because that's basically where you're going to be for the first like 6 months to a year. Because building community is hard, right? It's a balancing act, and you're going to be at the bottom, not at the top of this human pyramid. This is a human pyramid in like 1919 in France. And so here's a couple like ending tips here for you about building communities. So make communities like comfortable, like a place to be that's homey. You want people to be comfortable and happy there and supported, because they will stay longer. Okay. Allow ownership within the community. So mother and father doesn't always know best. You don't always know best. And being part of a community is to help you get more information or more ideas and sort of adjust things from there. You may be the leader of that community, but you may not always know best. And it's, you got to let down the ego a little bit there when you're running a community. So create rules and enforce those rules. That's important. Like I said, you can't make everyone happy, but make that 20% happy, and then the rest will follow. So perform daily or weekly rituals. So you should have things that people do on a regular basis together, where it's playing games or showing their NFTs or posting memes. And if you can have something that is a regular feature of your community, maybe it's a podcast or something, go check Hashing It Out on Twitter every Thursday. Hashing It Out. And, make content that can be shared as part of your community. That's one of the major growths of community, is when people produce content. And again, even things like memes, if your community is producing it and then putting it out there, it helps to draw people into your community. So be sincere, be authentic. I think I've said this a couple of times already, but it is very important. And perhaps one of the last things here is don't ignore the community when they tell you what they want. So I've seen this happen a lot, right? Like, oh, we know best. We know really what the community wants. They don't really know. But the truth is, just like when a person tells you who they really are, believe them. When a community tells you what they really want, at least really dig into the idea that they actually know what they want. So keep that in mind, or your community will start floating away. This is my second to last slide here. And again, we've got Greg Eisenberg, and this is from his company that he wrote. This is called Late Checkout, and he says, a business without a community is a business. A business with a community is a movement. And so that's sort of my final thought here. And I feel for, Web 3.0, this is the direction that we're heading. We're heading towards more of a movement than necessarily a business. So thank you for suffering through all that with me. And if you guys have any questions, hopefully you've been posting them in the chat if you've been watching this live. If not, come and join our Discord at the Nervous Network blockchain. And the easiest way to find it, I think, is to go to this www.startwithnervos.com. It's NERVOS.com. And then go to the support section. In the support section, it will have a link to the Discord. You can find me on Twitter at @thevanderwall. That's my last name. Or you can always email me at eric@nervos.org. So thank you for attending this talk. And once again, I'm going to say, if you haven't joined our hackathon yet and you are a blockchain developer, what are you waiting for? We have like ridiculously awesome prizes, which is like money, good money to win. And our topic's DeFi. Again, go to the Discord, get more information, chat up with us, and see what's going on. Okay, until next time, guys.